For the first time in the history of the opioid crisis, the American justice system is treating a pharmaceutical CEO responsible for pushing addictive and deadly drugs on doctors and their patients the same way it would treat a drug kingpin pushing the same stuff on the street, and it's all playing out in a federal courthouse in Boston. 5 former pharmaceutical execs, including John Kapoor, the founder and now former chief executive of Arizona-based pharmaceutical company Insys Therapeutics, was convicted of racketeering last week, a criminal charge generally reserved for the mafia, for funneling millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks to doctors to get them to prescribe more of their fentanyl drug called Subsys, including to people who did not need it, practices described in this unusual piece of evidence.
Insys Therapeutics, that is our name. We're raising the bar and we're changing the game.
Just drive sales, get you succeeding on. And if it's a Friday, get your iPad, better keep it on. Off the label talking, man, we not up for discussion. We'll arrange to get a speaker you can meet with over supper. We can come into your...
Yes, that's a rap video in which 2 Insys employees are apparently urging staff to push more sales of the fentanyl drug by any means necessary. It was filmed in 2015, the year 33,000 Americans died of opioid overdoses. Kapoor and 4 other former execs were also convicted of fraud in the trial that wrapped up on Thursday after a federal jury deliberated for more than 2 weeks. 5 of them face up to 20 years in prison. Case is just the latest in a string of blockbusters brought by the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts since he last joined us here 9 months ago. Andrew Lelling has also brought charges against more than 50 people in the college admissions scandal, several Boston, Massachusetts state police officers accused of overtime fraud, and most recently against the local judge for allegedly helping an undocumented defendant evade an immigration officer. And though Andrew Lelling is not able to discuss the merits of ongoing cases, all else is fair game. Andrew Lelling, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
As testimony concluded in this case, the judge said the conspiracy case was, quote, pretty darn thin, and then 15 days of jury deliberations. Were you worried? Were you nervous during that time?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because, and this was odd in white-collar cases, the jury was out that long, but never came back with any questions. The jury comes back with a lot of questions. Then you start to worry because there might be some dissension or they don't understand the case. In this case, the jury came back with one question, which was a reasonable, smart question, and then just continued to deliberate, eventually came to a conclusion. So I think they were just going through all the material.
Why does it take so long for prosecutors to target the individuals atop these empires rather than just fines or the mid-level guys? Why did this take so long?
It's hard to get the guys at the top because they're generally insulated from exposure. So in a case like this, the sales reps at the bottom of the ladder, they're the ones having interactions with the doctors. You got to go a few levels up the chain to get the guy at the top, to get the CEO. That's very hard to do. It's been hard for 20 years. It was hard in Enron back in the early 2000s, and it's hard in this kind of case.
So is it going to get any easier? I think I saw late April that, I hope this is a trend, I think it was the Southern District of New York where some drug distributor, Rochester or something, was also, they were indicted for some criminal charges. Is that a function of what happened here? Did that happen because of this, do you know?
I don't think it happened because of this. I think it happened because many of the U.S. Attorney's offices are now focused on this end of the opioid epidemic. Unlike the prior drug epidemics, like crack, for example. In the opioid epidemic, a big factor in the use of opioids nationwide is legitimate pharmaceutical-grade opioids being distributed through prescriptions. And so what you're seeing now, and this started earlier in the term when then Attorney General Sessions urged us to do this, we began looking at the companies involved in that kind of distribution and whether they were doing it responsibly.
Are other U.S. attorneys calling you and getting advice to pursue comparable kinds of things around the country?
Yes. We cross-pollinate among the offices. I think this is the first successful prosecution of its kind. And I think the techniques we used, I don't think were that new and interesting. We've been using them in corporate fraud cases, for example, for years. But it's just hard to move up the chain to the chief executive's office.
I don't know if you worry about such things or even think about them, but I do, that this kind of prosecution can scare other executives straight. Do you think about that, and do you buy that notion?
Yes, I do, because unlike, say, street crime, corporate level crime is deterrable. So companies in this space, pharmaceutical companies, they have lawyers. The lawyers say to them, hey, you need to keep this in mind because this could be you next time. And they will alter behavior accordingly.
Let's move to something else. I know you can't discuss, again, the pending cases and this college admission thing, but I've asked a lot of people the following, which I really wanted to get to you about. What's the difference between a couple of parents paying tens of thousands of dollars to a coach or that ringleader of this whole an operation like this, and say, and let me pick an example in Dan Golden's book, Charles Kushner donating $2.5 million to Harvard just weeks before his son Jared got in. And in the book, by the way, unnamed officials from his high school said he would never have gotten in on the merits. What's the difference?
The difference is fraud. So, as has been true for time immemorial, if you donate $10 million to a school, that school's more likely to take your kid. And arguably, that school should be more likely to take your kid. They can use that $10 million to do things for the rest of the student body, and it's a good thing. There's no fraud. Here, you have people making things up. So you have fake SAT scores, or you have students creating fake profile, or parents creating fake profiles for their kids, implying or showing that the kid is an athlete when the kid is not an athlete. So the difference between these two scenarios is the existence of fraud in the case that we brought.
But if they gave, let's say, several $100,000 to a coach and didn't say, hey, coach, you have to agree that my kid can play volleyball when he can't even jump, but rather said, I just want to give $500,000 to the volleyball team because I love volleyball, the latter would be perfectly legal. The former could put you in jail.
Well, that gets complicated because the athletic coach, the only way the athletic coach gets to use his slots that have been allotted to him by the school is by convincing the admissions committee that this kid's an athlete. And so if you're not lying about being an athlete, the coach has nothing to go on.
Does the other thing I mentioned to you, even if it doesn't have fraud, does that trouble you or you're okay with it?
Does what?
Buying your way into a college?
Well, I think people vary on this, meaning, I'll say this. Without the fraud element, it's not criminal. And that's sort of where my official opinion ends.
Okay. So let's talk about another case you can't talk about, Judge Shelley Joseph. When you announced the indictment of Judge Joseph, here's what you had to say. It's April 25th at the press conference. Here's U.S. Attorney Lelling.
We have heard of other instances in which was alleged that judges have done something to help people who are pursued by ICE. I don't think it's the only time something like this has happened in the Commonwealth.
Does that mean that other comparable indictments are being contemplated?
Well, I'm not going to comment on comparable indictments, but I think in what we're contemplating. But I think in this instance, it's important to say that what I meant there is that over the past few years, we've heard rumors of judges doing this or judges doing that. I don't want to identify them. But this was the first time we had come across an instance where, one, as alleged in the indictment, we think it was clearly criminal, and two, we would be able to prove it. And so that's why this instance stood out for us.
I know you don't want to name names. Do you know of other instances of behavior of judges that does trouble you, that at least comes close to the line?
I know of instances of other behavior that did bother us, but may or may not have been criminal under the federal statutes we enforce, and certainly not something we would be able to prove if we wanted to.
So there's not an indictment in waiting here?
Well, again, I'm not going to comment.
Last couple of weeks ago, sitting in your spot with two other prosecutors, the Suffolk County DA and the Middlesex County DA, who had just filed suit against ICE saying, we don't want any of these ICE agents in our courtrooms. What do you think of that?
I don't see the basis for the suit. I mean, it'll be litigated in court, but there's a few things going on here. Because the issue is so politicized, I think the issue of ICE agents in courthouses has become somewhat exaggerated. I'll give you an example. When ICE agents go to courthouses, they're looking for one person. They're looking for the defendant who's supposed to show up that day for an arraignment or whatever else.
Or a witness.
They're never looking for a witness.
Never.
They're never looking for a victim. I'll tell you why. They wouldn't even know if those people were there. The reason why they're there looking for a defendant who's on that day is there's a public docket with that person's name. That's how they know the person's going to be there to begin with, and that's why they
So you don't buy at all the notion there's a chilling effect of having an ICE agent there on a witness potentially. Let's assume they're not even targeting that witness for the reason you said, but the witness reads about the ICE agent in court and says, I'm not going to court. I didn't hear what Andrew Lelling said. All I know is they might snatch me. You don't worry about that at all?
Well, no, and I'll tell you why. One, if the ICE agents are following their own procedures that they're supposed to follow, there should not be a chilling effect. Most of the time, these officers are showing up in plain clothes. They speak to the court officials in private. A person is taken into custody in a non-public area.
But you read in the Globe the next day that someone was snatched. The snatch is snatched.
Right. Sometimes it doesn't go that way, and that's on the government. The government needs to do it the right way. As to whether people are indeed deterred in some greater sense from going into court, I'm not aware of any statistics on this. I doubt how big a problem that really is.
If
I'm not
those
saying it never happens. I think it does happen. It's a matter of how much it happens.
One last thing about that case. You know, you took a lot of criticism from people in Massachusetts filing those charges. Here's what the Attorney General of Massachusetts had to say. Today's indictment is a radical and politically motivated attack on our state and the independence of our courts. I'm deeply disappointed by U.S. Attorney Andrew Lelling's misuse of prosecutorial resources and the chilling effect his actions will have. What do you say to her?
As I said at my press conference, I couldn't care less what the underlying law was that the agents were trying to enforce. I don't care if it's immigration, tax, drugs, whatever it is. My focus is on the conduct of this judge. To me, it's not an immigration case. I know that seems counterintuitive to people. It's a rule of law case. You have, the indictment alleges, a sitting judge who helps a federal fugitive evade capture by letting him out the back door. You can't do that. I don't care what the feds were trying to enforce. And so, no, there's nothing political about this case. And it's an unfortunate coincidence that it's an immigration case. To me, it's just a rule of law case.
How about the overkill notion that she voiced that could go to the Commission on Judicial Conduct? No?
Well, I'll put it this way. It is public that this incident occurred, I think, about a year ago. And in December of 2018, the Boston Globe ran an article outing our federal grand jury investigation, and I can now confirm that, yes, there was a federal grand jury investigation at that time. But I'm not aware of anyone, any state authority, the Mass AG's office, the Mass Trial Court, ever referring Judge Joseph to the Commission on Judicial Conduct in that period.
Had they done it, would you have possibly not indicted her?
I don't know. I can't comment on that. But the only answer to that I really can give is yes, we look at those things. And so the indictment alleges, for example, that not only did Judge Joseph commit what we say is obstruction on that date in April 2018, but then lied to her superiors about it afterward. And that's in the indictment.
Last thing before you go, U.S. Attorney. Last time you were here, you said, talking about Jeff Sessions, the guy's the best AG in 20 years. I'm a huge fan. How do you feel about William Barr?
It's funny. They're very different. I am a fan of Bill Barr. Sessions and Barr, very different attorney generals. They bring very different styles and very different strengths. One of the things I like about Barr is that you can tell that he's been in the job before, and it contributes to this feeling that he's unfazed by current events. He's going to do the job. He's had it before. He's not so worried about his future career. He's worried about just doing the job.
One of your predecessors, Bill Weld, was sitting there the other night, and he said, reading the whole Mueller report as he did, he thinks that Barr made a mistake, that there was absolutely criminal obstruction of justice, and he should have been indicted. Do you agree with him?
I can't comment on that.
Andrew Lelling, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for your time.